All right, some of our noon games have gone final and includes number 14, Florida State. 6 touchdown favorites over East Texas A&M, that big win over Alabama last week. Tommy Castellanos wide open to Deuce Robinson down the field to put Florida State up 14-0. That's the longest pass of Castellanos' career. Worth another look. Next Florida State drive, 1st and 10 from the 42. Quarterback looking down the field, another bomb to Robinson. One-handed catch. First 4 throws, 4 for 4 for 148 and 2 touchdowns. Florida State would go on to win 77-3. Robinson, 5 catches for 173 and 2 touchdowns. Let's jump ahead to the 4th. 70-3, Zay Parks taking the handoff. And again, that big margin of victory for the Noles, their largest in school history and second most points scored in program history. Florida State scored their first 7 offensive drives of the game for the first time in program history, and 63 or more points in a game since 2013. They did so against Idaho. Hey there, folks. I'm Tommy Tran with your post-game report with the Killer Bees, Brian McFadden and Beanie Wells. Guys, so let's start with BMAX Noles coming off fresh that win over Alabama. Heavy favorites over East Texas A&M. Easy to say what stood out to you, BMAC, but just give me the whole lowdown of what you saw today.
Just the sense of urgency, because they had an emotional weekend last weekend beating Alabama, especially in the fashion in which they did. So I wanted to see exactly how dialed in will the guys be. Will they come out a bit sluggish, or will we see lack of execution? But none of that surfaced in today's matchup. The rhythm was there, the sense of urgency was there, the physical mentality was there. That led to a really, really impressive win. Granted, you played against a team you're supposed to beat, but what joy is there when you don't take advantage of those said opportunities? And the most important thing that I saw today, last week was about the ground and pound attack. They ran the football around the yard, but what we saw today was the passing rhythm surface, along with Deuce Robinson showcasing that he is wide receiver 1. I can tell you this much, guys, if you take 0 off his jersey and put 1-3, he looks just like Mike Evans. I mean, the measurables, his skill set, and just being a sure-handed guy surfaced today, along with Tommy dialing up dime after dime after dime. Impressive weekend there for the guys in Florida State.
No doubt an impressive weekend. You have to love it. You know, them coming off of that emotional victory last week versus Alabama and coming out and kind of making a statement saying that wasn't just a fluke. You know, granted, it's versus East Texas, but to put up 77 points versus anybody is an impressive stat. And, you know, I love the way Tommy Castellanos played. He commanded the offense. He made big plays. He was decisive in his decision, and he dropped dimes. And then you talk about Deuce and Singleton, both of those guys, you know, doing some incredible things today. Florida State, dare I say it, might be back. Might be back.
We never left. We just had a bad year.
Well, easy for you to say that. You can see it from the outside. And then they've got Kent State, of course, which, again, they'll be heavy favorite. And down the road, Miami and Clemson are certainly looming again for this Florida State team. But, again, they did their business and win big time, 77-3. Let's get to Penn State, which was a 6-touchdown favorite over their team against FIU today. Now, again, this is all about contextualization, right? They were favored against FIU. They didn't cover the number, but it doesn't mean that they didn't play well. You mentioned, you know, you're expected to win. When you're a team, this is 2 straight weeks that they've been big favorites over Nevada here and then over FIU. What's the general consensus on a football team to win these games?
You're supposed to win. That's the most important feat, right? No question. But in college football, the way you win is also important when it comes to our job, right? Analyzing and predicting what we think will happen moving forward. This game was 34-0, but guys, when you watch the game, it was a lot closer than the final score. And the reason why is because of the offense being a bit stagnant. In particular, Drew Aller. I mean, Drew Aller today, guys, 200 yards through the air. He averaged 6.1 yards per throw. 19 of 33. He completed 57% of his passes. That's not first-round production. That's not, quote-unquote, best quarterback in college football production. So something seems to be a bit off, guys. So look what he did week 1. Great graphic there. He didn't really blow you away. He was more efficient, but he didn't really blow you away like you would think he would against that level of competition. We just talked about Tommy Castellanos. Granted, he played against East Texas A&M, not the same level as at FIU, but you would think when you look at the expectation for Penn State, the expectation for Drew Aller as an individual passer, this is where you find your stride. Completing below 60% of your passes is not Drew Aller like football in terms of the potential that we know he has. So it was a good day. They ran the ball well. Defense played dominant football, but you need more from your quarterback because you guys remember, in the playoffs, that game against Notre Dame, he did not look good. And it seems like he hasn't really found his rhythm just yet. And hopefully he can kind of get things going because they need him to be at their best in a few weeks when they see Oregon.
I know that about it, man. And Penn State is going to have an opportunity to run the table and make a deep run in the playoffs. It's going to be because of the way Drew Aller plays. And I think everybody always falls in love with his numbers, his measurables. But when it comes down to playing in big games, he hasn't quite shown up. And, quite frankly, when you look at James Franklin, there's been question marks there about him and his ability to get it done in big games. And obviously this not being a big game, but this being a game you should have went out and won decisively, and you're not winning it in a convincing fashion. Yes, 34-0. It sounds good on paper, but when you watch it, it's much closer, like B-Mac mentioned. And I think a lot of the questions before was, well, who does he have to throw to? Well, they went out and got some pretty good wide receivers in Kyra Hudson and Trevor Penny. So they got some wide receivers to put the ball in their hands that can make plays, and he's just not quite seeing the field enough to get the playmakers the ball. So that is cause for concern. They won comfortably. I think you go back to the drawing board, you figure out some things from an offensive standpoint, and you try to get him to, take that next step maybe next week. But it's going to be a long season if they continue to play this way.
So let's piggyback off of what you said there, Beanie, because we do have the Nittany Lions scheduled. They got Villanova, but they do have Oregon in 2 weeks. So that's going to be a big matchup against the Ducks, who are playing Oklahoma State and are the big favorites here. So you mentioned the potential of running the table. You also mentioned going to the drawing board. So again, this week, what will the emphasis be here for this Nittany Lion offense?
I think it has to be getting Drew Aller to see the field in its entirety. Too many times I think he locks in on one side of the field and maybe doesn't go through all of his progressions, seeing other open wide receivers. And right here, when you have the playmakers that he has, that shows. The devil is in the details.
B-Mac, let me give you defensively in the Nittany Lions through 2 games so far. What's the outlook on that group?
Dominant. Dominant. FIU had moments where they could have made this thing extremely sticky, but that was effaced because of how dominant Penn State's defense was from start to finish. And Drew Aller needs to take every member on that defensive team out to dinner collectively, because when the offense was a bit stagnant, they made sure FIU didn't have any glimmer of hope to try to make this thing interesting for 4 quarters. So this defense, and you never question, under James Franklin, that's something you won't question, right? Defensive production, defensive consistency, seeing a mindset. That's something that they do, and it's still there in place right now as we speak. But to Benny's point, eventually, your star quarterback has to deliver like a star. When you are considered a potential first-round prospect, we need to see that first-round production. And games like today is where you need to be able to surface and show up. You cannot have a game where you're completing 57% of your passes. Normally, that's losing football. But because of how stout the defense was in the running game, it didn't matter in a matchup like today. But to your point, in a few weeks, Dan Lanning and the Ducks are coming to town. And you cannot afford to have a game where you're completing below 60% of your passes and expect to win against that type of organization.
So I'm listening to hearing you guys about the Nittany Lion. I'm curious to get your guys' thoughts on the Texas Longhorns, who, of course, lost to Ohio State. Beanie, of course, you know well what happened there. So they go against San Jose State. 38-7 is the final. And for Arch Manning, Beanie, he had 5 total touchdowns, 4 through the air, but he did have 2 turnovers here. So what did you see out of him in that Longhorn offense today?
I thought I saw a young quarterback, and he's finding his way, trying to hit his stride,